He thought it was the biggest betrayal of his life. The powerful CEO, used to control and perfection, stood at the altar with fury burning in his chest. Whispers filled the church as the bride's veil concealed what everyone called a cruel trick. His friends smirked, the guests chuckled, and the air thickened with humiliation. They said he had been trapped, forced into a marriage with someone unworthy. But when his trembling hands finally lifted that veil, what he discovered didn't just silence the crowd. It shattered his heart, his pride, and every belief he carried about love, beauty, and justice. Ethan Caldwell was a man who had it all, or so the world believed. The young CEO of a global real estate empire, he moved through life with the cold precision of a machine. Power, wealth, respect, he wore them like armor. But beneath the sharp suits and confident walk lived a man who trusted no one. He had built walls so high that even those closest to him could never see what was behind them. On the morning of his wedding, whispers trailed him like shadows. This was no ordinary marriage. It had been arranged by his late father's will, an agreement meant to strengthen business ties with another family. Ethan hadn't chosen this bride. The union was forced by duty and by contracts inked long before he had any say. He was assured she came from a suitable background, but the secrecy surrounding her appearance stirred rumors. His business rivals sneered that he was being tricked into marrying someone ugly, unworthy, or damaged. To them it was poetic justice, a king humbled. The grand hall glistened with chandeliers, every guest waiting for a show. Ethan stood like stone at the altar, his jaw set tight, pride burning through humiliation. The bride entered, her face hidden beneath a heavy veil. The guests craned their necks, eager for scandal. For Ethan, each step she took was another nail hammered into his pride. He had built his empire on power and appearances, and now the world was about to laugh at him. Yet beneath that veil was not the humiliation he expected, but a truth that would unravel his very soul. As the organ played, and the bride moved down the aisle, Ethan's mind was a storm. The whispers in the crowd were sharper than daggers. Guests leaned into one another, smirking, waiting for the moment the veil would lift. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a public spectacle, and Ethan knew it. When the bride reached the altar, her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in his. He could feel the softness, the warmth, but his heart was locked in bitterness. To him she was not a partner, she was a burden forced upon his name. His pride screamed that he was being mocked. The ceremony dragged, every vow heavy with silence. Ethan barely looked at her, his eyes fixed on the smirking faces in the crowd. The veil stayed low, hiding her from them all. For the bride each moment was suffocating. She had grown up in the shadows of prejudice, her family judged for their background, their looks, their lack of refinement. She knew this marriage was never about love. It was about business, alliances, and contracts written with ink that didn't care about hearts. Then came the moment. The officiant announced the lifting of the veil. The crowd hushed. This was it, the unveiling of what many expected to be Ethan's humiliation. Ethan's hand hesitated, his pride clashing with duty. Slowly he raised the veil. Gasps rippled across the hall. The face beneath was nothing like the cruel rumors suggested. She wasn't ugly, or unworthy. She was striking, beautiful in a way that silenced the mocking whispers. But what made the air heavy wasn't her beauty, it was the bruises. Barely hidden beneath the careful makeup were scars of abuse, shadows of nights filled with cruelty she had endured from a world that treated her as less than human because of her background and her family's poverty. Her eyes, though bright, carried the weight of someone who had been torn down countless times simply for existing in a world that worshipped wealth and power. The crowd didn't gasp at her appearance, they gasped at the raw truth written on her face. Ethan froze. This wasn't the humiliation he had expected. This was something else entirely. In that moment the fortress of his pride cracked. He realized he wasn't the one being mocked. She was, and she had lived with that mockery all her life. The hall felt suffocating. 1,000 whispers, 1,000 judging eyes bore into Ethan, waiting for his reaction. His bride's gaze trembled beneath his, yet she stood tall, head slightly bowed but unbroken, like someone who had carried the weight of shame far too long and refused to bend further. For Ethan, the choice was no longer about business, image or pride. It was about humanity. Then it happened. A man in the audience laughed, sharp, cruel, echoing across the silent church. Look at him, the mighty CEO trapped with damaged goods. The laughter spread like poison through the air. Even people who knew better chuckled nervously, afraid of being the odd one out. Ethan felt his chest tighten, fury rising. His father's voice, his board of directors, society's sneers, all of it pressed down on him, demanding he step back, walk away, save his pride. But when Ethan looked at her, at the scars barely hidden by her veil, at the strength it took for her just to stand there, he saw something else. He saw resilience. He saw someone who had survived more battles than he ever had in his polished, privileged life. He realized that walking away wouldn't just break her. It would prove every cruel voice in that hall right. And suddenly, Ethan did the one thing no one expected. He pulled her hand tighter into his own. Then in front of everyone he turned to face the crowd. His voice, steady but firm, cut through the murmurs. This woman is my wife, and if you cannot respect her, you do not deserve to stand here. Gasps, shock, a ripple of silence. But Ethan didn't stop there. He leaned in, kissed her hand softly, and locked his gaze with hers, making it clear to every witness that this was no forced humiliation. This was his choice, his defiance. And in that moment, the bride's eyes welled with tears, not of shame, but of a strange, fragile hope. For the first time someone had chosen to stand with her, not against her. The entire hall shifted. The bullies went quiet, and the man who had once seen her as nothing more than a trap, now stood as her shield. The ceremony did not end with applause, nor with the polite smiles that usually followed weddings in high society. It ended with silence, heavy, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the steady sound of Ethan holding his bride's hand as though letting go would mean betraying her all over again. Guests shifted uneasily. The wealthy elites who had come expecting gossip and entertainment suddenly found themselves exposed. Their cruel laughter, their whispered insults, their mocking stares, it all hung in the air like smoke. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others fidgeted, unwilling to confront the mirror Ethan had just held up to their faces. The bride who had entered the church like a prisoner led to judgment, now stood taller. Her scars, once a target of ridicule, now seemed like marks of survival. Her trembling had stopped, and though tears welled in her eyes, they no longer spoke of humiliation. They carried dignity. Later that night, after the hall had emptied and the jeers had faded into silence, Ethan sat across from her. The air was still tense, the future uncertain, but for the first time words were not needed. He had seen the weight of prejudice and cruelty she had endured. She had seen the courage it took for him to defy an empire built on appearances and power. What bound them together now was not convenience, not contract, not the forced arrangement that had brought them here. It was something far rarer: truth. Days turned into weeks. The story of that night spread far beyond the wedding hall. Some called Ethan foolish, claiming he had ruined his image for a woman beneath his status. But others, many more, saw it differently. They saw a man willing to destroy his pride to preserve another's dignity. They saw a woman whose scars no longer silenced her, but spoke louder than cruelty ever could. And so, a union born of humiliation transformed into something unexpected, into defiance, into strength, into a partnership forged not in fairy tales but in fire. For Ethan, the greatest wealth he ever gained was not from mergers or titles but from a single choice to stand against ridicule, even when the world watched. For her it was the discovery that sometimes, just sometimes, someone would see past scars, past shame, past the ugliness of prejudice and choose love anyway. And for those who witnessed it, or even just heard the story, the question lingered like an echo in their minds. When faced with cruelty, would you join the laughter, or would you be the one who stood up and said enough? Because in the end silence makes you part of the cruelty. But courage, even from just one voice, has the power to change everything. And as Ethan stood there, with every eye upon him, he felt the weight of a choice pressing down on his shoulders. He could join their laughter, or he could rise against it.